Hola a todos, ¿cómo están? Soy Lamin y bienvenidos a Afro Spanish, the imperfect. We are going back to the future. Sorry, I mean back to the past. Now the verbs in the imperfect have something that the verbs in the preterite don't have. And anyone who's learning Spanish love that about the imperfect. And I will tell you exactly what that is later in this lesson. So stick around to find out why every Spanish student love the imperfect. If you understand the preterite, then it's not going to be difficult to understand the imperfect because they are not alike, which means if the preterite goes this way, then the imperfect will go that way. And if the preterite goes up, then you guessed it, the imperfect will go down. I guess you got the idea. So when do we use the imperfect? Well, the simple answer is that we use the imperfect to talk about the past. And I guess the next question is, so what is the complicated answer? Well, the complicated answer is that some situations in the past require the imperfect and other situation requires the preterite. We have seen the situation that require the preterite. And before we see the situations that require the imperfect, let's first see how to conjugate the AR, ER, and IR verbs in the imperfect. Let's begin with the AR verb. And let's conjugate the verb hablar. Yo hablaba. Tú hablabas. Usted, él, ella hablaba. Nosotros o nosotras hablábamos. Ustedes, ellos o ellas hablaban. Now what we did was subtracted the AR and added aba for yo, abas for tú, aba for usted, él and ella, habamos for nosotros and nosotras, haban for ustedes, ellos and ellas. And this ending is for all the AR verbs. Next, let's conjugate the verb comer for the ER verbs. Yo comía, tú comías, usted, él, ella comía, nosotros and nosotras comíamos, ustedes, ellos and ellas comían. As you can see, what we did here was subtracted the ER and added IA for yo, IAS for tú, IA for usted, él, ella, IAMOS for nosotros and nosotras, IAN for ustedes, ellos and ellas. Now let's conjugate the verb vivir for the IR verb. Yo vivía, tú vivías, usted, él, ella vivía, nosotros and nosotras vivíamos, ustedes, ellos and ellas vivían. As you can also see here, all we did was subtracted IR and added IA for yo, IAS for tú, IA for usted, él and ella, IAMOS for nosotros and nosotras, IAN for ustedes, ellos and ellas. As you can see that the ER and IR verbs have the same ending. And there is an accent mark on top of the I. And also that the yo and the usted, él, ella look just alike. Now, when it comes to the AR verbs, the nosotros is the only one with an accent mark. Now that we know how to conjugate the verbs in the imperfect, let's see the situations that require the imperfect. And I'm going to give you two situations to keep things simple for now. And the first situation that requires the imperfect is when you are describing something or someone in the past. For example, number one, la profesora tenía el pelo corto y llevaba una bufanda. Number 2, hacía frío en la escuela. Number 3, ella se sentía más feliz con Pedro. Number 1, we are describing the length of her hair and what she was wearing on her neck. Number 2, we are describing how the temperature was in the school. And number 3, we are describing how she felt when she was with Pedro. So remember to always use the imperfect if you want to describe something or someone in the past. The second situation that requires the imperfect is when we talk about habits, routines, or repeated actions in the past. For example, él jugaba fútbol todos los fines de semana. Number 2, ella siempre limpiaba la casa. Number 3, ellos se despertaban temprano todo el tiempo. Number 1, we use the imperfect because it was something that he did every weekend. Number 2 also required the imperfect because it was an action that was repeated every day. And number 3 was also an action that happened all the time, so we needed to use the imperfect. As you can see, when it comes to habits, routines, and repeated actions that were done in the past over and over and over again, we use the imperfect. Now, a secret weapon is to always use the imperfect whenever you are going to say, I used to or I was. For example, I used to eat or I was eating. Use the imperfect, and if you get it wrong, you will be corrected. Now that you made it this far, I'm going to tell you exactly what the verbs in the imperfect have that the verbs in the preterite don't have. And it is that we have a long list of irregular verbs in the preterite. And yes, we still have irregular verbs in the imperfect, but there are only, are you ready for this? Because there are only 3 irregular verbs in the imperfect. And you heard right, 3 irregular verbs in the imperfect. And they are ser, ver, and ir. Now for ser, we got yo, era, tú, eras, usted, él, ella, era, nosotros o nosotras, éramos, ustedes, ellos o ellas, eran. And for ver, we got yo, veía, tú, veías, usted, él, ella, veía, nosotros o nosotras, veíamos, ustedes, ellos o ellas, veían. And for ir, we got yo, iba, tú, ibas, usted, él, ella, iba, nosotros o nosotras, íbamos, ustedes, ellos o ellas, iban. Let's see some examples. Yo era tímido cuando era joven. Nosotros éramos más fuertes cuando éramos jóvenes. Él no veía películas de violencia. Ella iba al cine todos los sábados. Él iba al club todos los fines de semana. Now the imperfect might seem intimidating in the beginning, but once you get used to it, it's very simple. Homework, find out if you are going to use the imperfect or the preterite to talk about the time, date, and age in the past, and put it down in the comment. And as always, thank you so much for your support, and thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you for watching. Muchas gracias y nos vemos.